Aha, here's the man.
Hi, Corey.
Morning. How are you?
Good. Yeah, it's so funny because, it's evening here, and then I work a lot in the US. So then, meeting times here, but then in Australia, there's always my mornings get taken up. So yeah, it's so interesting. Just this global life we all have.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Now, have you guys spoken before?
Oh no, never visually seen each other. No.
Oh, okay.
I'm a big fan, Kristina.
Thanks. I feel like at the moment I haven't been as productive this year as others, but I think there's something brewing underneath. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to find out a lot more about Kairos and Chronos and Cosmos and Temenos, because they're all Greek sayings. And
I don't know if I can do all of them, but there's a little bit, that I know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, reflecting on the whole concept of Kairos, was there a moment in your life that felt like an opportune or decisive turning point? A time when the universe seemed to align in a meaningful way?
I think there's always are we recording now, or this is just chit chat?
Oh, just chit chat.
Yeah. I think I really like Robert Ohotto's work, like Fate to Destiny, and I think there's many of those Fate to Destiny moments that can occur, and so I think almost like being thwarted in a way is a destiny moment from different directions that you are kind of going in. So I would say actually, a recent one would really be the pandemic and the inability to fly back to Australia, and then being here in Lithuania, where I'm trained in constellation work, but I don't do too much myself. And so recognizing having to go back to the beginning of the intergenerational trauma for my family, which began fleeing the Second World War here. So that was I guess one of those where you just went, okay, there was, I couldn't make the emergency flight to Berlin that the Australian government was offering and all those things. So it was very a moment where I know I now would have two very different lives if I went back to Australia when the pandemic was on versus staying here.
Yeah. Where are you based, Kristina? Is it Lithuania?
At the moment, I'm in Lithuania.
You're in Lithuania, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I understand that the man over there in Russia is striving to put back the Baltic states.
Yeah, and also I was in Nida, which is by, I think it was it's just a couple of kilometers from the Russian border. Belarus is when you're in Vilnius, it's 30 kilometers away. So a very understanding the nature of oppression that those that particularly in these states just geographically have had to live through. And why, obviously, with so many having to flee and being born in displaced people's camps, and the refugee lifestyle and the diaspora, and how that's why we're so supportive of Ukraine at the moment is we know what it's like to have freedom taken away. And almost just the sense that it's right at our borders again. And again, going back to Carol and Mesa's work, it's triggered all the survival archetypes because we actually are in survival. So, yeah.
And what do you actually identify with in your work? Do you identify with the 12 archetypes?
Not particularly. I'm not a fan. I think that there's always and not in an elitist way, but there's nursery school and primary school and secondary school and university, and there's some stuff that we know. Oh, really? I'm still in high school at this kind of, and some others you're teaching the master's or the PhD program, and there's this. I think there's especially with archetypes, there's a huge spectrum, and I think those 12 are really the entry point. But I think there is much more actually beyond those, if people were interested and wanted to work with them. Because in a way, unfortunately, they do actually sometimes just become stereotypes because there's not that quantum and holographic nature in the way that they're sometimes presented. And often it's done in a very business and commercial setting as well. The soul's not really present. They're almost hijacked in a way for materialist reasons.
Yeah, and I guess as you know, as you go higher up the vibrational spectrum, from red to orange to yellow to green to blue to indigo to violet and beyond, it becomes much more finer and much more refined and much more invisible, which we don't see. You know, it's a bit like a film strip. You know, you've got lots of frames. We only see the one picture, or it's like being tuned to a TV channel. You know, you're tuned to one channel, but there are lots of other channels going on. It's just you're not tuned to them, but they're still going on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things going on in our world that we don't necessarily see or we can't necessarily touch. But, you know, it's like the wind. You know, you can't see it, but you know it's there.
Yeah. Also, that W.H. Auden quote, "We're shaped by invisible forces we pretend to understand." So I think that, again, it's also that trying to codify a lot of it and almost like make them very rigid and boxed when that isn't what they are at all. So, you know, and then, I mean, yeah, I just like Meghan Markle calling her failed podcast Archetypes has also done the work absolutely no favors whatsoever either.
Yeah. Corey, do you want to jump in?
It's a vast ocean, so I better put my life preserver on. No, I'm just thinking, what myth are we living? I'm talking about the royal we, because it seems like there's quite a bit of uneasiness in the world today, but I imagine there always was, and so. But you know, I mean, for me, I'd like to see if we can swing that towards some happy medium, perhaps, and how to best to go about that.
Yeah.
Well, it's how to discern Kairos moments in the midst of daily routines and challenges, because in what ways can cultivating mindfulness and presencing, how can that enhance our awareness of Kairos moments?
But again, when you're in that survival, and it doesn't need to be like, you know, the jungle survival, but emotional survival, which most people are in, it's not even available. There's no meta awareness at that moment. So, and again, it's being able to recognize something in the moment that it's occurring. And then from there to be able to do something that is either the antithesis of what the mass are doing, or even the antithesis to what you usually do, your own behavior in that moment.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. And I think that's where we need to bring about an awakened awareness so that it changes our perception. So we're not just looking at the frame, but we're looking through the frame, and we're looking, you know, so that it opens up arenas of possibilities, and, you know, hopefully constructive arenas of possibilities, not destructive ones.
Yeah. I mean, I there's just almost but I think so much of it is having a different approach, where I've got some friends that are in neuroscience, and you know, a lot of the work that they do that are also on the spiritual path is it's about the sequence. And so say if you didn't develop particular reflexes when you were an infant, you're never going to be able to feel safe in your body to be able to do some of the things that we're speaking about now. So the point doing your 2 hours meditating a day, or your like chakra course, or whatever it is, because actually it's out of sequence and we're not used to doing some of these basic things in the body actually first before we can actually then go tackle the emotional domain, let alone the spiritual one beyond that.
Well, and I think that's part of the issue is that, when I speak to a lot of people on the podcast, many people are doing plant medicine and ayahuasca. And my view is that I think that's fine. And I don't have a view about them actually doing it. But my view is that I think we need to get into the body, not out of the body, because this is always in the present. It's the mind that can be either in the past or in the future, but this body is always present. And, once we start to get a deeper penetration and a better grip on what we're here to do at a soul level, what is our purpose and how we align to that. Because for me, the soul is a bit like a conductor. You have an orchestra, and all these musicians are trying to tune their own instruments. Mm-hmm. And then the conductor comes along, and with his baton, he taps, and it brings everyone together in harmonic mutuality, so that in a way, the soul is almost like a semiconductor on behalf of the universe that brings those things together. So there can be a tuning, there can be a harmonic concord, if you will, and a mutuality, so that when they actually play together, you get the tune, you get the melodies, you get the harmonics, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Agree.
The one verse, the one song, the universe. Yeah. Kristina, you've been talking about sensory quite a bit recently. Is that correct?
Oh, just because I've got another thing in my 45 minutes. When do you start recording?
Oh, not today. This is just a meet and greet.
Oh.
Yeah, this is just
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was a meet and greet just to establish a rapport and see where we want to go with things. And because I always believe that it creates number one, there's a mutual sort of co-shaping that goes on. Okay. And it's just to allow that energy to circulate and to see where it lands. And then we can move towards a recording at another date to have a real dialogue about things.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm just very used to everyone's time is precious, so you get on and then we start. So yeah, no, that's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah, no, good. Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Corey, carry on.
Yeah, did we want to go over some of the things that we've been going over prior to our meeting here today, and the things that I sent you, Kristina? Is that something that would be good for us today too?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
good. Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. Peter, you have these as well, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
sure, you go ahead.
I imagine we all have, but yeah, I mean, we all work with people, whether it's individual and Kristina, I imagine it's also corporate for you, correct?
Yeah.
And then if we look out to the greater world and some of the international theater today, what are some of the dominant myths do we feel are prevailing today? And it's something of to borrow from T.S. Eliot almost 100 years or so ago, I mean, are we still in this wasteland? And then, if that's the case, what might be, what are the consequences, and what are the better, let's just say, more harmonious alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that say we could say with the pandemic, that was really, in some mystical traditions, it's the hermit that is the entrance point to the underworld. So we all were in a way, some people might call it like home prison, but there was a way that we could have created a hermitage for ourselves. But what we did was Netflix and chill. And so there was that missed opportunity for the collective entering a dark night together. So I think that, again, the myths now, I think, are, like they say, once upon a time is once upon a now. So this idea that, and again, coming from Australia, and I studied Aboriginal cosmology, where at university, like for whites would say dream time to discuss their cosmology, but that's actually absolutely massively incorrect because, well, number one, it's a noun. Secondly, it's this idea that it once happened, and whether people believe it or not, they might say, okay, well, for the sake of argument, I'll just go with you that this rainbow serpent came through here and created this billabong that gave this mountain that did blah, 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 blah. And maybe I'll respect it out of culture or heritage. But really what it is, it's not dream time, it's dreaming. And that's present continuous. So the myth is always being dreamt into being. It's not this one-off, something that happened historically in the past, never to happen again. So I think it's like, how do you have that holographic perception where the dream it's today? And look at why Hadestown was so popular in America, because all of us want to go to the theater and say, but it's the one time that I go that Orpheus doesn't look back. And that's where the future really is. It's in that co-creation. So it's like, what would the world look like if Orpheus didn't look back? What would it look like if Persephone willingly ate, the pomegranate seeds? And that's, I think, really the work instead of. And yeah, like I work for the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and I mean, last year we did decentralizing the hero, but the hero's journey is not the right story for this time. So the minute that anyone speaks to me about that, I'm like, not that I just lose interest, but it's just like wrong story, wrong time, wrong place. I don't know what. And then it's not even the heroine's journey because you're still in this like contracted binary kind of model. So it's really about what that collective journey looks like. And it's not about going back to the ancient myths and saying, oh, well, Prometheus, that's all about AI. Okay, yeah, maybe. But it's also how do myths actually start speaking to each other, and how do we co-create myths together? And the myths that will be of the most concern are the ones that concern the environment and the earth as a whole, not just one particular tribe.
So multi-species dreaming.
Yeah, and very galactic as well. As it's just that idea of what is Earth's role in the galaxy will actually shape more direction in the myths that are, I guess, available as touch points for us, rather than those that are very geographic and Earth-centric.
So this is taking the idea of heliocentric to a whole nother level. I mean,
Yeah, but I think it's also most people, there's a step before that, which is most people don't have a mythic consciousness. They don't have an archetypal eye. They don't regularly display poetic imagination. Symbolic awareness is something not available to them. So again, because we're right brain deficient, we really are, a left brain culture. So again, the first is almost like, what's the bridge between the two? So it's not arts or science, but both the arts and the science, and that each have, validity in their own, time and place. But again, the ability to perceive in a world that really values what is tangible. It's why a lot of people don't actually have the skills to even be able to enter the realm.
What do you offer to people to help them enter these realms? Since you mentioned that there's so many people who this is perhaps an alien concept, and then maybe they're curious and wanting to, but they're not quite sure how.
Yeah, because a lot of people, again, it could be that idea of that imaginal realm. It's invisible, right? So it's again like the invisible has no value. But we all know we can walk into a room and feel the consequence of someone's attitude. We can feel the wind, all those kind of things. And we ourselves know that, oh my gosh, when I'm in my power and I'm sticking on my diet, I can easily walk past that donut shop. And when I'm not, in my power, but I might still be wearing what looks like power on the outside, oh my God, there I am ordering 6 dozen, shoving them in my mouth. So it's first being able to we were just saying earlier, Peter, about, that quote, W.H. Auden, we're lived by forces we pretend to understand. And so it's this awareness of these forces. So for some, maybe that's what a lot of an astrologer's work is. Okay, so then when you kind of get the Uranus, Saturn, and COVID hits, they can make some correlations going this here, the cosmos and the psyche, like the Richard Tarnas link. So I think sometimes that has to occur. But I think first, most people, they really only enter that world sometimes either when everything else has failed them.
Mm-hmm.
And in that's the myth of Ariadne and the golden thread, because like when Theseus dumps her after she saves him from the Minotaur, and she's distraught, and all of us know that feeling, like a betrayal, a divorce, a sickness, or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, I was only actually having everything in the physical and material world fail her that she hooked up with Dionysus. So, and that's it. Like most people, it's the mortal and the material world has failed them in some way. And that is what lifts their gaze to more maybe a divine order or a mythological perspective.
What comes to my...
So suffering, basically suffering, like always.
Well, what comes to my mind with what you're sharing with us now is it kind of sounds like an initiation. I guess we're always being I think you might have said something along these lines somewhere some time ago, that I guess we're always in a state of being initiated.
Yeah.
Whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, which is a very different way to be with a friend who's going through something, right? To be able to kind of say, well, maybe you're being initiated into a greater level of power versus the friend being upset about their whole world kind of falling apart. And because, again, we don't have, how do you get people into it? Like rituals, we don't really have those. That's why Michael Mead's work is amazing, because we don't have rituals to hold people as these things occur, and also don't have those community bonds to be able to say, oh, I'm being initiated in this area of my life, and actually I need the tribal wisdom or the ancestral wisdom to hold me in this at the moment. So it's not just a lone individual making it about themselves, when it's always initiation is beyond the self.
We don't have a temenos of tranquility.
No. I mean, Temenos says that in London they do wonderful lectures, and if I go back to London, I really want to go to them. But again, Temenos, most people wouldn't know what it is, how to create it, what it looks like within their own kind of body. And I think Campbell even wrote something about you have to carve some time out in your day where you forget who you are. Yeah. And now with like our phones, my phone is always telling me who I am. And it's always plugging me into an identity as well as an identity that's based in the past. So to do that true, and when I went to Robert O'Hodder 8-9 years ago, the work was all about in the death to rebirth, like you can't be the same person on the other side. But again, being attached to our phones, we don't have the capacity to really have the Phoenix moment, because the structures and the people and everything around us won't actually let us go to that death point.
We don't think in terms of birth and death. We don't think in terms of those cycles, because in terms of you can look at winter time and you think nothing is going on. Everything has died, but actually under the ground there is life brewing, because there's the ignition of spring coming, and that cycle repeats itself. Well, for now at least, it repeats itself because it's part of the system of our planetary arrangement, and we are part of that arrangement. But I think one of the issues I see is that we are the way that the societal structures are, I would say, not facilitated but manipulated, is to organize and propel people to follow a curriculum which is designed to fulfill an economic imperative, as distinct from getting a real education.
Yeah.
Right? And when I say a real education, I'm talking about all the things that you're mentioning, the unseen aspects of our life, the seen aspects of it, our five senses, beyond our five senses, understanding our emotions, understanding our soul, understanding all these different aspects of things, which have been stripped out of what the real meaning of university, the original term for it. And it's very sad to see that, because what are we actually producing here? What are we creating? And I think until we change or actually transform, because change tends to mean you do something more, better, or different, until we transform those societal structures one step at a time, then we're just going to repeat history, because history repeats itself in well-trodden routes. And everybody, when I was watching TV in the States, and my cousin loves all the politics, and it's like non-stop media, and I don't really watch TV, but when I sat down and I was looking at it with a different perspectival lens. And what occurred to me is that people are so busy trying to make others wrong and win arguments, as distinct from providing real, practical, sustainable solutions.
I think it comes back to, again, if you're not aware of like the seven, the primary like emotions, what is it? Seeking, fear, anger, lust, care, grief, and play, and not to be able to name them in your body, then you're going into the secondary emotion. And that's what that's all media is, secondary emotion. It's not primary. And then, and again, like Joanna Macy's work, the difference between placing something that doesn't suit us anymore, patriarchy, whatever, hospicing it, and midwifing the new, because how you end something is how you begin something else. So we don't even know how to hospice the systems that are failing us as well. And then, absolutely, with the seasons, just like it's all dark. The gestation happens in the darkest times. But again, the way that Instagram culture is, it's just everything above the surface. It's horizontal, not vertical. So I think that horizontal media-based culture prevents a lot of, what we're speaking about from being able to occur, because otherwise you get stuck in change. Like you just become like the more mindful caterpillar, or the more meditative caterpillar, or you never become the butterfly. When you're the butterfly, you don't think like the caterpillar because you're not on the ground anymore. And so we're fooling ourselves a lot. Like Jung would say, the metanoia. We haven't had the change of consciousness. It's just still caterpillars with the spiritual ego.
So
beautiful.
So it's keeping us more. It's keeping us more or less in our persona, and rather than the depths of our soul, from the sounds of it. And
one thing I said. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was thinking that we're not giving pause and space for this, the alchemy, for the winter to become spring, for instance.
But I'd say to that, like most people would quote Jung and Campbell a lot, but they don't realize that both married heiresses. Like Emma was the third wealthiest person in Austria, and Jean Adler, Joseph Campbell's wife, was an heiress as well. You cannot write the Red Book if you're a single mom on welfare with 3 kids to feed. You don't have that in you. So we keep putting these men on these pedestals that had someone running the home, like millions and millions and millions, to be able to go into the depths of the unconscious, whether it's like the therapy to get or other people in this, or they can get themselves out through the monetary means. But it's not even that. It's that they actually had the space to be able to do the descent. And because we're not descending at the moment, we've made the upper world our underworld. But then we keep looping back to these people that had certain privileges in life that were able to take the journey. And yes, they gave us some maps, but actually it's like if you go hear a startup founder speak, or a great I'm just thinking of someone I know, a director in Australia. They're actually trust fund kids. So when they actually say jump and the net will appear, that's the truth, metaphysical, but it's so much easier when you know that there's a trust fund that will kind of catch you. And so I think there's this red book in so many people at the moment that they're either trapped in the identity, especially men. So you went through a divorce and you've got huge alimony. You cannot get out of that identity that the job will give you to do your own red book. And yeah, so I just think that that's something that never got spoken about in this kind of area, about what it actually takes to be able to not just in ourselves hear the call, but to be able to, in a familial setting, take that journey on.
Now, Kristina, now you have quite a bit of an experience with the Australian culture. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel yeah, I grew up there. Yes. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking it's like one of the oldest cultures, supposedly, of our species, and so I imagine they have quite a bit of history and knowledge and experience as to what we're speaking of right now.
Yeah, but you've got to remember, like, up until the 1970s, an Aboriginal person was still classified as flora or fauna. They weren't actually a real person. We just had a referendum a few weeks ago in Australia where we voted not to give them a voice to Parliament, not to have a voice to the Constitution. It's absolutely horrific what's happening with the Indigenous there. So this idea, that Australia usually just takes out we're the oldest culture of the world just to sell more boomerangs. It's not a lived daily experience for most people. And we can't almost speak about it because we then have to look at, how it was founded on the convicts from Britain, and they were the convicts that stole a loaf of bread. These weren't the kids that killed someone. So there's so much intergenerational trauma, and then the colonial mindset that's actually our own unconscious biases and things like that. It's huge. So we don't really have that connection other than what we see in a tourist campaign. Okay, yeah, I studied anthropology at university and a bit, but again, the way that the Indigenous say, they only teach us the myths to year 3 because they know we cannot do anything more with them. And then the myths also are geographically based, and it's a completely different culture. So it's not like the Seven Sisters is a very important myth for them, linked with the Pleiades, as it is in all cultures. But again, you're not actually worthy of the knowledge, of the wisdom. And I really actually like that because most people in Australia were not worthy of it.
Wow, that's interesting. So thank you for that. What are you? You mentioned trauma. I feel that is probably the timeless, universal, and perhaps even more so today. What do you have to offer to people who are perhaps stuck in the trauma?
Offer, I in the sense of that many of us, it's like, what's that saying? Like, do you actually speak from the scar or from the wound? I think there's very few people in the world that speak from the scar. Most of us are in various versions of the wound, whether we're ourselves ripping the Band-Aid off or that it festers or whatever it is. So I think also we still also have an archetype of the wounded healer. We don't really see the model, like Carolyn Mace would say, of an integrated healer yet. So the wound is still always, again, like the initiation point, but is still, like if we look at the myths, Chiron never healed himself. Like he had to, he died because he didn't know how to be with the wound. So we don't even have in society ways to say it's not about fixing, solving, getting rid of, but maybe how do you elegantly carry on the journey with? And I think, we can talk about post-traumatic growth and everything like that, but that requires, because they say what trauma is like if I pour all this stuff in more water in this cup and it overflows, that's trauma because the cup can't hold it. But if I get a saucepan or like a really kind of big bucket, the expansion can hold. And what we don't have at the moment is those tools to be able to help ourselves to expand more of it, to be able to not contain it, but that so it doesn't actually fracture the individual of us, the vessel of us. But I think, yes, it's very important to recognize first that intergenerational trauma is a thing. And I think that's probably one of the next really big things for countries to do.
Absolutely.
Let alone in our own lives, because most of us, everything that most of us are doing is a coping mechanism out of a trauma. Yeah.
Well, and there's also an error signal because we don't sequence data in a way where we only pay attention to one variable. We don't look at the relationships between variables, because when we start to look at the relationships between variables, it yields a different signal, because then we get an order and sequence of things, maybe not in a linear way, but in such a way that you start to layer in all these different aspects of things, and then the signal becomes much, much clearer, because you start to really tune in like a tuning fork. You tune into the resonance and the frequency and the vibration of that layering and the relationships between those variables, rather than keep getting the error signal, and then you react based on your conditioning, or the unresolved inner child, or the abandoned child, or the wounded child, and so on and so forth. So I think and this is where the educational aspect, the AEIOU in education, if you will, that's where the real education comes in, for me anyways, as distinct from just following this curricula, because clearly the Aborigines or the AB origins didn't have a curriculum, because they were connected. They were semiconductors on behalf of something much, much higher that they could actually become a terminal point for. So they became an agency of amplification for dreaming, for imagination, because you look at any cultures like Greece or the Roman Empire, when they all became very much left brain dominant, they started to crumble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But to that point, like say someone didn't know they were a forceps birth, and so the frontal lobe is a little bit damaged, and they have no executive functioning skills, right, and really struggle in the world. So there's all those that is occurring, those invisible as well as the visible that are there. And then of course that is absolutely engages with, are you more mentally or emotionally or action dominant? And really what we're trying to find is the third, that we're actually the one that is very difficult for us, because we keep going back to the default network. And so if many of us were always in the emotional part of the brain, always getting the amygdala hijacked, not realizing what the hell happened until 2 days later, not being able to be in present time and name an emotion in the body, but then still want to go do the ayahuasca trip or still do that. And you can see, why we're in this like mess that we are in.
And it's trying to bring, we're trying to bring, because, in a way, it is like that dark night of the soul, where when you're faced with a crisis, it reveals what's crucial. It's almost like crisis reveals cruciality, which then brings about a chaos, where then you're trying to bring or fathom coherence out of that chaos. Mm-hmm. But people get stuck in that loop because they cannot sequence that data. They don't pay attention to the relationship between all those different variables. So to me, it's like almost a lattice. It's like lattice work, like whereby one thing connects to another, even though they seemingly, on first blush, they seem like they're all separate. But there's nothing really that separate, because when I look at some of these indigenous peoples, and I haven't done the same amount of study you have, but it seems to me that even though they're in a physical form, they're looking at it from a cosmic point of view, in a way that there is no time and space. We're actually here to experience all these things through the physical, like surprise, like joy, like depression, like anger, all these different emotions, which are, and I may be wrong in this, but which are maybe a different frequency and level of vibration. Everything is instant. So telepathy, boom, happens. Everything is instant. So discovery may not be the same from that point looking in down through the spectrum, maybe from beyond violet to red, right? As distinct from looking from red towards violet. Because most people are operating at the red, the red, orange, green part of the spectrum. It's not the indigo violet part of the spectrum, and it's not the invisible part of the spectrum, even though they are within it, but they're not actually cognizant of that fact, because the perspectival lens is not looking at it from a soul level. It's looking at it from just a Newtonian reductionist lens. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm a bit jet lagged, so I'm trying to be as coherent as possible.
Indigenous in Australia, when they look at their star system, they navigate through the dark, but the white navigates through the stars to form the constellations.
Right.
So that already is a world view that is very different. And so it's a bit like if you've ever seen those magic. You've two dots, find the third dot, and then an image will come out at you. And it's almost like our patterning sometimes will prevent that third dot, because we actually would not be able to cope with what we actually saw there. So we always try to imagine it as we wanted, and that keeps us in a trauma loop. But to what you were kind of saying earlier about like panic, say you have ADHD, that's like a nervous-based interest system. You only do things that you're actually interested in, are novel, maybe have an element of challenge to them, or panic. So I have ADHD, so you're always either operating out of interest or panic. There's actually nothing else there, like in a neurotypical, that could do priorities or rewards and consequences that are important. So again, it's these, how much of it is something that is in a way born into our worldview by whether geographically, family, and nature, but then all the interesting is that fate to destiny, or that epigenetics of the bit of, okay, well, what's it actually going to take for me to get a worldview where I now navigate the star system through the dark and not through the light? The fate is like, that wasn't my fate to be born into the system. The destiny is, this is really important, and I feel like this is actually something for humanity and for me, and moving in that direction. But I think so often it's so easy to say of our conditioning, and keep it that way, but still absolutely recognizing that so much, especially the default network in the brain, that has been already set before we were 5. And I think that's where we get into a lot of, again, archetypally, the victim. And it's very hard for humanity at the moment to get out of that, rather than see it as where we are as an initiation.
What's the antidote to being a victim?
Yeah, well, number one, I think first is, if you look at the victim, it's usually very passive. So it's either the doer or the done to. So the ability to have agency. And so that's why I think even the Navy SEALs say, like, make your bed every day, because it's the agency, I made my bed. So it's really, well, what can I actually feel victorious about?
I think that was in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life. Yeah. Make your bed.
Yeah, they all say that, or like get up early and exercise, or whatever the thing actually it is. But I think it's first being able to recognize that you're a co-creator. And that, from when you're in the victim, it's a very difficult to even to go to that. But say you're, I don't know, you've had a heart attack and you've been told you've got to change your diet and lose weight and this and this. There's no way the victim is getting you up out of bed to go for a jog in the morning or so it's almost like the athlete, because the athlete wears sports gear because they train, not because they're wearing leggings or around the house. So an athlete, the archetype of the athlete, trains like rain, hail, or shine. So it's almost like, again, if I can tap into the archetype of the athlete, that will actually help me, because the victim, no amount of awareness leads to progress. And I think that's where we've got most people think more insights will actually lead somewhere, other than, because it's still head. We haven't moved it into the body, and there's not the embodiment of it. It's not something that, it's still that shelf knowledge. So yeah, so many people think more insights, more awareness, more understanding is the thing that will actually shift it into behavior, but it won't. And I think part of it is recognizing the importance of virtues, which are live in the heart. And actually it's more practicing virtues rather than the knowledge and information that will do more good for them than, again, another workshop, another seminar, getting on that wrong.
Well, people become very... well, gosh, I can't remember the word. Where people jump from one thing to another, thinking that the more insights they get.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, product knowledge is just using the brain as good data storage.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you look at the word education, which is educia there, is to draw out, not to stuff in. But we stuff things in, and I always say this, but what we think is self-help becomes shelf-help, right? And then we can then vomit out an answer because we've retained something, and we go check. Oh, that makes you smart. Well, it doesn't really make you smart, because again, you're not using the human design for what it was intended for. Because I think when you are connective to your values, to your principles, to your foundations, and how you address those, and how it's located within you, then you don't have to remember all these things, because it creates more of an unclogged straw. You're not going, oh, I'm not quite getting it into, it's not flowing. Well, you just need to unclog it. And that's why, Corey and I were talking about this. People are vertically unwell.
Kristina. Sorry, Peter. Kristina, so,
sure.
This might be, novel for a lot of people, what we're presenting here. And a lot of times, this is from my experience, is that the opportunities they might shut down these opportunities a lot of times because of fear, and they don't feel safe in their mind body. If you experience this working with people, how do you approach them from a safety perspective, and how might one help another or themselves to feel safe and more open to these things?
Yeah, like I just, with some colleagues actually in the US, we did a workshop on Weird Barbie. And a lot of it was about owning your weirdness as your superpower. And so one of the things that I was speaking on was like, neurodiversity as being, owning that as your superpower. But it's saying that it's again not fixed. It's something that's developed en route. So I don't have the answer, and I think that's like, that does create that safety, because again, we're in varying degrees of a spectrum of, say, what the superpower is. And so an example, when I'm in an ADHD meltdown, that's my kryptonite version. But so often people only want you in that neurodiversity when you're in the superpower version of it. So how do I be with that when I'm in the kryptonite version of it myself? And then to be able to hopefully convey that to the people that I'm working with, or we're in a group. But I think being able to, gauge someone's capacity for self compassion when you first speak. And again, I know a lot of people that won't work with people that don't show, I don't mean in a grade level, a high level enough of self-compassion, because there's no way you could do the shadow work. They're just going to turn it in on themselves and become their own worst abuser. So that's like one aspect of it. And I think part of it is that safety, again, in the body. And it's really being able to, I'm saying, like, say in a bit more deeper levels, but it's like, if you feel that, you don't belong and you don't feel safe, and you don't feel loved, almost in the sense, nothing, you have to be able to give that to yourself. But that's like a life's journey there. So part of it is to be able to say, well, what is it that you can do to feel those things in this moment? So in a room, it's like, if you're cold, go get the blanket, go do that. Like, what do you actually need to do in this moment so you feel physically safe? And I think it's setting some of those things up to, especially if it's a day event or something, to give, again, the agency back to the person that, oh my gosh, I know how to make myself safe. And I can do that. But so often when it's just heads and theory and things like that, of course, no one's going to pick it up and there's going to be the fear. And it's, again, not about the communicating knowledge. It's much more, what does something bring up in you for you to have your own experience? Because we need to start speaking more from our own direct lived experience, not from externalized others. Even a podcast, no matter how good your podcast is, I appreciate it. But it's just that for the person to be able to have that within themselves, because it's only when it's inner directed will the transformation in a way then be sustainable. Otherwise, you're still in a way gauging yourself in regards to something that's external.
Kristina, what comes to my mind, and I imagine all of us here are familiar with Ram Dass, it just sounds like we're just walking each other home.
Yeah. And at various degrees and paces. And I know some studies that I was doing, like, it's almost like no one progresses until everyone in the class progresses. So you have to get out of that left brain individualist, like, well, I'm doing so well, so I'm ready for the next class. But Sally down here that's struggling, actually, the course curriculum is to help Sally to get to the next level instead of me trying to get to where I want to go. So practicing patience or humility or whatever it is. So I think that again, when it's still based on a very healing at the moment, to me still feels too individualistic rather than collective. Being part of a community, the I guess byproduct of that is good well-being, not well-being for myself, this individualized version of well-being. It's a byproduct of contributing and giving and kind of serving. So yeah, a lot of those things will have to be not turned on their head, but I think sometimes the awareness of them, and then you just can sit there and just say, and again, like, if you're a fishbowl in and the water's toxic, everything's sick, society is sick. And again, Gabor Mate pointing that out. And so being able to recognize that many, say, traditional illnesses, say alcoholism, it's a collective issue or a family issue. It's not the issue of the individual, but we bear all the brunt and the burden on the individual. So I think that, and that's, I think, that temenos, what are those collective healing spaces that can exist?
Well, how do we create a safe space so it can be a brave space for that collective to engage in? When I'm Greek in my ancestry, and I spend time in Greece, and the level of community on the island is very high. And when you see people interacting with each other, especially families and friends and the kids and the grandparents, is that it offers a level of, in that community or common unity, is a level of immunity, not just immunity from one's physiology, but immunity in terms of the support that they give to each other, the connective threads that really bond people together as a collective, whereby if there is a crisis, then people come together to find solutions, practical solutions, as distinct from, just an academic pursuit or an academic perusal about the situation. But they have real practical toolkits of understanding through that collective, because people come together. And I think that level of immunity, and I think there are many levels of immunity that are not just geared towards the physical body. So I find that really interesting when you start to look at, why do people in Korea age really well, to well over 100, and scientists will talk about, well, it's the food and it's this, but no one has mentioned the fact that there are very close knit collaboration and community there, which I believe that has a cellular, molecular effect on the unconscious, on the body. Yes, we can talk about environment, we can talk about diet, we can talk about the way that we live, and those are all very, very important. Because if you're an alcoholic, or you are
sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to interrupt. So I've got to jump on another call in
okay.
the States.
Yeah.
Hopefully that was enough of a intro.
Yeah.
Deal of what? Yeah. So you will send me some other times then to do the recording?
Sure. Would you like to come and do a podcast with us?
Yeah, if you're inviting, absolutely. I'm sure there's so much to unpack. Yeah.
That's great. What's been your experience today?
Great. There's just so much there. That's the thing that I would just say, like, it would have to be choose something, because like we could do like an hour on 10 different topics that we discussed, very easily.
Yeah.
So
is there anything particularly you want to talk about?
I think that there's almost just a sense of like the probably a little of Caroline's book, like Why We Don't Heal. And I think that it's, again, all those things that can touch onto a lot of the other stuff that we were kind of saying, like whether it's community or not being in the body or not being right brain dominant and things like that. So
great.
All right. I'm so sorry. I got to jump. So
that's all right. Thank you so much, Kristina.
Thank you, Kristina. Thank you very much.